I spent 31 years catching people who lied for a living. I interviewed con artists, fraud rings, staged accident crews, people who burned down their own businesses and cried on camera while collecting the check. I thought I knew exactly how deception worked. I thought I was immune to it. I was wrong. The call came on a Tuesday morning in November. I was in my kitchen in Portland, drinking my first cup of coffee and looking out at the backyard that Carol used to tend so carefully. The roses were long gone by then, dried out and brown at the edges, because I had never learned which ones needed to be cut back in October and which ones needed to be left alone. I kept meaning to ask someone. I never did. My son's name came up on the phone screen. He never called on weekday mornings. He had an 8 o'clock class on Tuesdays. I knew his schedule the way I used to know my case files. I picked up immediately. Dad. His voice was low, careful, the voice he used when he was choosing every word. I need you to hear me out before you say anything. I set down my coffee. I'm listening. Don't give Diane access to the retirement account. Don't do it yet. I found something, and you need to see it before you sign anything. Diane. My girlfriend of 8 months. The woman I had been planning to introduce to my financial advisor that Friday. Noah, I know you think I'm being difficult. I know you think I haven't given her a fair shot. But Dad, this isn't about me not liking her. I have actual information. Can you meet me this weekend? I'll drive down from Seattle. Just the two of us. Before you do anything. I stood in that kitchen for a long moment, looking at Carol's empty garden. Then I said, I'll pick you up at the bus station Saturday morning. I need to back up. My name is Robert Callahan. I'm 63 years old. I spent 3 decades as a senior investigator for a regional insurance carrier, which is a polite way of saying I made my living catching people in lies. I was good at it. My clearance rate was the highest in the Pacific Northwest Division for 11 straight years. I retired at 61 with a commendation letter and a pension, and absolutely no idea what to do with myself. Carol, my wife of 30 years, had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 6 months before I retired. I had planned the retirement around her. I was going to be home. I was going to drive her to her appointments and cook the meals and be the person I had been too busy to be for most of our marriage. I got 8 months. She was gone before our first full year of me being home. Our son Noah was 19 when his mother died. He had just started his sophomore year at the University of Washington. He took the news the way he took most things, quietly and privately, and I watched him fold himself up tighter and tighter for the next year, like he was trying to take up less space in the world. We talked on the phone every week, but we talked around things, circling the real subject the way you circle a fire, getting close enough to feel the heat but never close enough to touch it. I started going to a grief support group in January of the following year. It was my doctor's suggestion, and I resisted it for months, before finally driving to a church basement on a wet Wednesday evening, mostly just to prove to myself that it wouldn't help. It helped, or it seemed to. That was where I met Diane. She was sitting across the circle from me that first night, a woman in her late 50s with dark hair going silver at the temples and the kind of stillness that comes from either deep peace or deep practice. She had lost her husband, she said, 18 months earlier. A heart attack. Very sudden. She said it the way people say things when they have said them enough times that the words have smoothed down like river stones, worn to the shape of the telling. I didn't talk to her that night. I sat and listened and drove home and thought about Carol and didn't sleep. The second week she saved me a seat. We started talking. Real talking. The kind that happens when two people have both lost something enormous and there is nothing left to protect. She was warm and funny in a dry, quiet way. She had been a high school librarian for 20 years. She loved mystery novels and hiking trails and the kind of coffee that came from a gas station because, she said, it reminded her of road trips. She didn't flinch when I talked about Carol. She told me I had been a good husband for going to the appointments. She told me the guilt would ease. Not disappear, but ease. 6 months later, she was spending weekends at my house. 8 months later, my financial advisor mentioned that it might make sense, given that we were talking about combining households eventually, to add her as a joint account holder on the retirement fund. I told him I would think about it. And then, I made the appointment for Friday. My son called on Tuesday. I picked him up Saturday morning at the Greyhound station off Morrison Bridge. He looked thin. He was always thin, but this was different. The thinness of someone who had not been sleeping well. He got in the truck, and he didn't say anything for a minute. Just stared out at the Willamette River through the windshield. "She's not a librarian," he said. I kept my eyes on the road. "Tell me." He opened his laptop. He had put together what I can only describe as a file. My son, who was studying environmental science, had spent 2 weeks building an investigative file on my girlfriend, and part of me felt a sharp pride cut through the cold dread settling in my stomach. He had started with her name, Dian Fletcher. There was a LinkedIn page, a Facebook profile, a photo or two, standard enough. But when he searched the name in combination with her supposed hometown, Boise, Idaho, and her supposed school district where she had allegedly taught for 20 years, nothing matched. No employment records, no union listings, no yearbook appearances, nothing. "People aren't always online," I started. "Keep reading." He had found 3 other men, all widowers, all between 58 and 65. All had connected with a woman using the name Diane or some variation of it, always at a grief group or a senior community event, always within 2 years of losing a spouse. 1 man in Spokane, 1 in Sacramento, 1 in Boise itself. The Spokane man had lost $40,000 before he realized something was wrong. The Sacramento man had sold a rental property at her suggestion and deposited the money into a joint account she helped him open. He woke up one morning to find the account emptied, and Diane, or whoever she was, gone. He had not gone to the police. He was too ashamed. The Boise man was still looking for her. I pulled into a parking lot near Waterfront Park and turned off the engine. My hands were steadier than I expected. 31 years of training doing what training is supposed to do. "How did you find the other men?" I asked. Noah exhaled slowly. "There's a forum for people who've been scammed on dating sites and grief groups. I found one of the posts, reached out, and he connected me to the others. They've been trying to track her for a year." I looked at my son. He had Carol's eyes, green with a ring of gold at the center. He was watching me carefully, measuring my reaction, ready to absorb whatever I threw at him. "Why didn't you come to me sooner?" I asked. "I tried." He said it quietly, without accusation, which was worse than if he had been angry. "Dad, I told you in September that something felt off. I told you she seemed like she was performing. You said I was comparing her to Mom. You said I needed to let you have this." I remembered the conversation. I remembered defending Diane. I remembered my own irritation at my son's resistance, interpreting it as grief, as possessiveness, as the natural reluctance of a child to accept a parent's new relationship. He had been doing surveillance, and I had told him he was being selfish. "You were right," I said. "I'm sorry." He nodded once. Then he closed his laptop. "So, what do we do?" Here is where my training finally did what I had always been paid to do. I took a breath, and I stopped being the man in love, and I became the investigator. Evidence first, confrontation last. "Does she know what you found?" I asked. He shook his head. He had been careful. He had used a library computer and a secondary email address. He had not mentioned any of this on the phone. Good. Then I called someone I had not spoken to in almost 8 years. Her name was Kezia Washington. I had first met her when she was 16 years old, sitting in my office at the insurance carrier because her mother was trying to collect on a life insurance policy that the company believed was fraudulent. The mother was not a good woman. The situation was complicated, but Kezia was something else entirely. Sharp and observant and almost pathologically honest in a way that seemed like a liability in the environment she had grown up in. I had done something that was technically outside my job description. I had connected her mother with a lawyer who got her the legitimate portion of the claim and kept her out of criminal trouble. And I had made sure Kezia had a contact number for me in case things got worse at home. She used that number twice over the next 2 years. The second time was when she needed a reference for a scholarship application. She got the scholarship. Then another one. She graduated from Portland State with a degree in computer science and information systems. The last I had heard, she was doing freelance digital forensics work, contract jobs for attorneys and private investigators. I found her website on my phone in the parking lot. Kezia Washington Investigations. She looked like herself, just a decade older, with the same watchful quality in the photograph. I called. She picked up on the second ring. Mr. Callahan. There was a pause. It's been a while. It has. I need help, Kezia. Personal situation. It involves digital forensics, and I need someone I can trust completely. Another pause. Then, tell me everything. We met at a coffee shop in the Pearl District that afternoon. Noah came with me. Kezia was 31 now, precise and serious in a way that reminded me of the best investigators I had ever worked alongside. She listened without interrupting, while I laid out everything Noah had found. When I finished, she asked 3 questions. What name was Dian using on her bank accounts? Whether I had ever photographed her identification. Whether she had a car, and if so, whether I had the plate number. I had the plate number. I made a habit of it. The same way I always memorized exits in any room I entered. Old habits. Kezia looked at Noah. You did good work, she said. Then she looked at me. Give me 72 hours. She had said don't change anything. Act exactly as you normally would. Don't cancel the Friday appointment. Don't give her any reason to believe anything has shifted. I had done this kind of work long enough to know she was right. But knowing something professionally and living it personally are 2 entirely different experiences. Diane came over Sunday evening and made pasta, and we sat at the kitchen table where Carol and I had eaten 10,000 meals together, and Diane talked about a hiking trail she wanted to try in the spring, and how she thought the guest bedroom would make a wonderful reading room if we repainted it, and I sat across from her and said all the right things while something inside me went very, very quiet. She was good. I want to say that without flinching, because it is true. She was exceptionally good at this. The warmth felt real. The laughter felt real. If I had not been a man who had spent 3 decades watching people perform sincerity, I would not have seen the small calibrations, the way she watched my face a half-second longer than felt natural after she made a suggestion, checking for resistance before her expression fully settled. She was reading me constantly, and I had mistaken it for attentiveness. I had wanted to be seen. She had been watching for weaknesses. On Tuesday, Kezia called. Her name is Sandra Pruitt, she said. She has 3 prior aliases. She's 54, not 58, born in Fresno, California. She has a juvenile record in California that's sealed, but she has 2 adult fraud charges in different states, both pled down to misdemeanors, both more than 10 years ago. She's been careful since then. No signatures she can't talk her way out of. What about the man she's working with? I had suspected there was someone else. There always was with long cons. The setup required coordination, a place to transfer money to, someone to receive it cleanly on the other end. Kezia had found him. His name was Craig Pruitt, her brother, not a character she invented, an actual brother, with an actual criminal history that nearly mirrored hers. He had been operating a fraudulent financial advisory service out of a mail forwarding address in Phoenix. The Spokane victim had been routed through exactly that kind of service before the money disappeared. She's going to ask you to use him, Kezia said. Watch. Within the next 2 weeks, she will mention that she has someone she trusts who can help you consolidate your retirement funds. That's how the Spokane man lost his money. That's how they do it. I thanked her, and I sat in my car in the parking garage at the Safeway on Burnside, and I felt the full weight of it for the first time. Not the professional processing of information, the actual weight. I had brought this woman into the house where my son grew up. I had sat beside her at the same grief group where I had first learned to say out loud that I missed my wife. I had let her into the places in me that losing Carol had broken open. She had looked at those places and seen a transaction. I gave myself 10 minutes. Then I drove home and started building the case. I called my attorney, a woman named Patricia Mercer, who had handled our estate planning, and who had been, like most people in my life, gently skeptical about how fast Diane had moved into the picture. Patricia had a poker face built over 30 years of litigation, and she listened to everything I told her without changing expression. "You can end this now," she said when I finished. "We revoke access to everything before she's officially on any accounts. You present her with the evidence. You make clear you know who she is, and she leaves. She probably moves on. No police involvement. And she does this to someone else," I said. "The Sacramento man is still trying to recover. The Spokane man went into bankruptcy." Patricia looked at me steadily. "What do you want, Robert?" "I want her caught. I want documentation of intent so ironclad that she can't minimize her way out of it. And I want Craig Pruitt's operation exposed so that both of them answer for all of it, not just what they tried to do to me." Patricia leaned back. "Then we need to give her exactly what she's expecting." The plan required patience that I had to work for, rather than simply apply. We would proceed toward the Friday appointment, but instead of my actual retirement accounts, Patricia would work with my financial advisor to create a parallel structure, a separate account holding a much smaller amount that would look, to anyone reviewing it, like the full balance. If Diane tried to direct me toward Craig Pruitt's advisory service, I would appear to go along with it. The moment any transfer was initiated toward that service, it would be documented, flagged, and forwarded to the fraud unit of the Oregon Department of Justice, where I still had contacts who returned my calls. The long part was waiting. Noah drove back to Seattle, but we talked every day. I gave him a progress report each morning before his first class, quick and factual, because he had earned that. He had done the work. He deserved to know how it was going. Diane came through exactly on schedule. The following Sunday, casually, over coffee, she mentioned that she had been thinking about our conversation with the financial advisor. She had a recommendation, she said. Someone she had worked with before, very discreet, very good with retirement consolidations. She had seen him help several people in her previous grief group simplify their finances before a major life change. I said it sounded worth looking at. She smiled and squeezed my hand. I went to the bathroom and stood at the sink for a moment with the water running. Carol's toiletry bag was still on the bottom shelf of the medicine cabinet. I had never moved it. I looked at it and I thought about what Carol would have said about all of this. And what she would have said was, "Finish it." So, I finished it. We met with Craig Pruitt 3 days later at a rented office space in Lake Oswego that looked legitimate if you didn't notice the absence of any personal items. No family photos, no real plants, nothing that had accumulated over time the way offices do when people actually work in them. He was good-looking, mid-50s, easy manner. He had done this before. He walked me through a consolidation plan that would move the apparent balance of my retirement account into a managed portfolio he administered. All I needed to do was sign a transfer authorization and provide the routing information. I asked for a week to review the paperwork. He said, of course, "No rush. Take all the time you need." He and Diane exchanged the briefest of glances when they thought I was looking at the documents. I saw it. I was always going to see it. I had Kezia recording the meeting on a device the size of a pen cap in the breast pocket of my jacket. Patricia had the documentation of the fake account structure. My contact at the DOJ fraud unit had an open case file with everything Noah had found, everything Kezia had uncovered, and the records from the Spokane and Sacramento victims, who had finally agreed to go on record now that they knew they were not alone. On the following Thursday morning, Patricia called Diane's cell phone. She identified herself as my attorney. She informed Diane that Robert Callahan was aware of her real identity, the nature of her prior fraud charges, her brother's financial advisory scheme, and the specific amounts taken from victims in 2 other states. She informed her that the Oregon DOJ fraud unit had an open investigation and that there was a recorded meeting in their possession documenting the solicitation of fraudulent financial services. She told her that Mr. Callahan was extending one opportunity for a cooperative statement before formal charges were filed. Diane's response was to call me. I let it go to voicemail. Then she came to the house. I had asked Noah to drive down that morning. I had not told him why, just that I wanted him there. He arrived at 10 and we sat at the kitchen table drinking coffee and waiting. And when the doorbell rang at 11:15, he stood up with me. She was still performing when I opened the door. That's what I remember most clearly. She had arranged her face into something between hurt and bewilderment, the expression of a woman who has been unjustly accused, and she was very nearly convincing. Robert, whatever your lawyer told you, there are things you don't understand. I can explain. Your name is Sandra Pruitt, I said. You were born in Fresno. Your brother is Craig Pruitt, whose financial advisory business in Phoenix has defrauded at least 4 people that we can document. You have been running this specific type of operation, targeting widowers in grief groups, for at least 6 years. She stared at me. You chose well, I said, and I was surprised by how level my voice was. Retired insurance investigator, grieving, recently alone. I probably looked like an ideal situation. The professional background should have made me more careful. Instead, I think I was less careful, because I believed that, of all people, I would see through it. The performance began to slip. Not dramatically, not the way it happens in movies, just a kind of recalibration, the warmth pulling back like a tide, leaving something harder and flatter underneath. You can't prove intent, she said. Everything I did was, we have the recording from the Craig Pruitt meeting. We have records of the Sacramento and Spokane situations. We have digital documentation of a pattern of behavior across 6 years in 3 states. We have an open case with the Oregon DOJ. My son was standing just behind my shoulder. She looked at him with an expression that might have been genuine, a recognition of the thing that had undone her. He figured it out, she said. It was not quite a question. He did, I said. My 21-year-old son, from 5 hours away, with a library computer and a willingness to tell me a hard truth I didn't want to hear. He did what I spent 31 years doing professionally, and he did it because he loves me enough to risk me being angry with him. She left without another word. She was arrested 2 days later at Portland International Airport. Craig Pruitt was taken into custody in Phoenix the same afternoon. The DOJ case built quickly once they were talking to each other, and they were talking to each other almost immediately, because the first thing people who have committed fraud together do when the system catches them is decide the other person is more responsible. The full investigation took nearly a year. Sandra Pruitt was convicted on 4 counts of wire fraud and 2 counts of obtaining property by deception. Craig took a plea agreement and received a lighter sentence in exchange for his cooperation. 2 of the previous victims were partially compensated from recovered assets. The Sacramento man, whose name was Leonard, called me the night after the sentencing and cried on the phone for a little while and then thanked me, and then we talked for almost an hour about the Portland Trailblazers, which we were both devoted to, in the irrational way of lifelong fans. Leonard has become a real friend. Sometimes I think that's the part of the story that would surprise Carol the most. Here is what I know now that I did not fully understand before. I had been a good investigator for 31 years because I trusted my training and my skepticism more than my emotions. And then I retired, and my wife died, and I forgot, for one critical stretch of time, that the skills do not transfer automatically. Knowing how deception works does not protect you from it. If anything, it can make you more vulnerable, because you believe that you would know, and that belief makes you stop looking. I had stopped looking. I had wanted very badly to stop looking. There is no version of this story in which Sandra Pruitt bears no responsibility. She was calculating and deliberate, and she hurt people who had already been hurt. But I played my role too, and understanding that, really sitting with it rather than defending against it, was harder than the arrest, harder than the trial, harder than any of it. Noah came home for Christmas that year, and we sat in the kitchen, and I made Carol's sweet potato recipe from the card she had written out in her careful handwriting that I kept in the drawer to the left of the stove. Noah ate 2 plates and told me it was almost right. Not quite, but almost. Almost is enough. Almost means you're still trying. Kezia came to dinner that night. She brought her partner and a bottle of wine, and she sat at the table where I had sat across from Sandra Pruitt for 8 months of Sunday evenings, and she made the whole room feel like the thing it was supposed to be. I told her I didn't know how to repay what she had done. She said I had already done it. 9 years ago, when I had treated a 16-year-old girl in a difficult situation as someone worth the trouble of helping properly. I think about that sometimes. The ledger of small decisions that runs underneath the visible story of a life. I chose to make one call on behalf of a teenager in a difficult situation. 8 years later, she spent 72 hours taking apart a fraud operation that would have cost me most of what I had worked for. I chose to invest in a kid who was stealing from a grief support group's trust. She chose to come back. That is how it works, I think. Not grand gestures. Not the large theatrical moments of love and loyalty we are shown in movies. Just the accumulation of small, genuine choices, extended and returned, across years, across distance, across the absurd and painful fact of time moving forward, whether we are ready for it or not. Carol's roses came back in the spring. I had asked my neighbor, a woman in her 80s who has been gardening since before I was born, what to do with them in October. She told me which ones to cut back and which ones to leave alone, and I wrote it down and I did it. And in April, the backyard filled up with the same deep red that Carol had chosen 20 years ago when she planted them. Noah noticed when he came home for spring break. He stood at the back door for a moment, looking out at them, and then he looked at me and he didn't say anything. Because he is like his mother in that way, knowing when something doesn't need words. My son drove 5 hours and spent 2 weeks in a library and told me a truth I was not ready to hear, at the risk of a relationship he was afraid he might lose. That is what real love does. It tells you the truth, even when the truth is inconvenient, even when you have given it every reason to stay quiet. If there's someone in your life doing that for you right now, I hope you are listening. I wasn't. For too long I wasn't. But I got lucky. My son didn't give up on me. Where are you watching from today? And who in your life would make that call?